He was invisible to most, just a janitor sweeping floors in a world that never noticed him. But one night, under the glow of a grand chandelier, everything changed. A billionaire scoffed, a crowd laughed, and a challenge was thrown his way. Play the piano, if you dare. No one believed he could. No one thought he belonged. Yet when his fingers touched the keys, the room fell silent. What they heard next wasn't just music, it was a revelation. The question is, how could a man they mocked become the one they'd never forget? By day, Samuel was just the janitor, his name stitched in small letters across a faded uniform. He pushed his cart down marble hallways polished to perfection, invisible to the men in tailored suits who hurried past. He lived in the quiet shadows of a billionaire's mansion, wiping fingerprints from glass doors, picking up after parties he'd never be invited to. To the wealthy, he was just part of the background, a man meant to clean up the brilliance of others while his own went unnoticed. But there was more to Samuel than anyone cared to see. Long before life had reduced him to mops and buckets, music had been his world. As a boy, he had sat at a battered church piano, teaching himself by ear, losing himself in melodies when the world around him felt cold. Every note had been his escape, every chord his prayer. But those days felt buried, hidden under years of being overlooked. The mansion where he worked was a palace of power, its walls echoing with laughter from the wealthy, with instruments treated like decorations rather than dreams. Among them sat a gleaming grand piano, untouched, silent, waiting. Samuel would glance at it when no one was around, his fingers itching with a hunger he could never show. And then came the night. A night of glittering guests, of champagne glasses clinking and cruel laughter echoing through the hall. Samuel was on the sidelines, as always, unseen. But in that moment, when a mocking challenge was tossed into the air, his quiet world collided with theirs, and everything he had ever hidden was about to surface. The ballroom shimmered with wealth that night, crystal chandeliers, golden railings, and guests wrapped in designer gowns and tuxedos. Music floated from a hired quartet, but their polished notes were only background noise to the arrogant laughter of billionaires sipping aged wine. Samuel moved quietly between them, unnoticed as always, collecting empty glasses and sweeping away crumbs dropped from tables he'd never sit at. But then the evening took a cruel turn. A billionaire guest, his voice loud enough to command attention, strolled toward the grand piano, sitting like a jewel at the edge of the room. He ran his fingers across the keys, producing a clumsy chord that earned him a chuckle from those nearby. "This," he declared, "is not just an instrument. It's a test only a true genius could master." The crowd leaned in, amused. "What if someone here can play?" a woman teased. The billionaire smirked, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing on Samuel. "What about him?" he sneered. The laughter erupted instantly, sharp and cutting. Heads turned, eyes scanning Samuel in his worn uniform, a mop still in his hand. The humiliation stung, but Samuel stood frozen. "Go on," the billionaire pressed, his tone dripping with mockery. "If the janitor can play this piano, maybe he's more than just a broom holder. Let's see what hidden talents he has." The crowd roared with laughter, clinking glasses, ready to be entertained by his failure. Samuel's heart pounded. He hadn't touched a piano in years, not since life's weight had forced him into the background. The keys looked foreign and familiar all at once. Every step toward that piano felt heavier, as though he were carrying not just the mop in his hand, but the years of silence, the weight of every dismissal and every smirk he had endured. The whispers cut through the air. "He won't play. What does he know about music? This will be embarrassing." Each word chipped at him, but beneath the sting, something stirred. A memory of nights in the church, of melodies he once believed in, of the boy who dreamed of filling rooms with music. He placed the mop aside. Slowly, hesitantly, he sat on the polished piano bench. His rough hands trembled above the keys, and for a heartbeat the room was filled only with snickers and murmurs. Then, silence. All eyes locked on him, waiting to see him stumble, waiting for the laugh they thought he would provide. And in that silence, Samuel took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he was no longer just a janitor. He was a man about to show them what they had never cared to see. The weight of silence pressed against Samuel as he hovered over the piano keys. The polished ivory reflected his calloused fingertips, hands more accustomed to scrubbing floors than creating music. Around him, the crowd waited like vultures, eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, lips curled in a smug grin, already certain of the humiliation about to unfold. But when Samuel pressed the first key, it wasn't clumsy. It wasn't hesitant. It was deliberate, deep, resonant, and alive. Then came another and another, until the hall filled with something none of them expected. The laughter died instantly, replaced by stunned silence. His hands moved with a grace that seemed impossible, flowing across the keyboard as though the music had been waiting inside him all along, aching to be set free. Notes cascaded through the room, weaving a story of struggle and hope, of pain and resilience. The melodies rose and fell like a tide, soft enough to draw a tear, powerful enough to shake the walls. Every chord carried the weight of his life. Every run of his fingers spoke what words never could. The janitor they had mocked became a master before their eyes, commanding not just the piano, but the very air in the room. Gasps broke through the silence. A woman covered her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. The billionaire's grin faltered, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. For the first time, the powerful and privileged weren't in control. Samuel was. And then, the final note hung in the air, pure, unwavering, eternal. The room erupted, not in laughter, but in thunderous silence. No one dared to move, no one dared to breathe. They had come expecting ridicule, but what they witnessed was genius. In that moment, Samuel wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't a janitor. He was the man who had forced the world to listen. When the final note faded, the silence was louder than applause. The very people who had mocked Samuel sat frozen, their laughter trapped in their throats, replaced by shame. For a long moment, no one spoke. The grand chandelier still sparkled above them, but the light in the room felt different, softer, humbled. Then slowly, hands came together. A single clap, hesitant at first, grew into a wave of thunderous applause. Not polite, not forced, but genuine, awestruck. Guests who hadn't even looked at Samuel before were now standing, their eyes wide, their pride shattered. The billionaire who had thrown the challenge sat red-faced, shifting in his seat, his arrogance stripped away by a man he thought beneath him. Samuel didn't bow, didn't smile. He simply rose from the piano bench, placed his rough hands at his side, and walked away. He wasn't looking for their approval. He never had. For him, the music wasn't about impressing the wealthy. It was about reclaiming himself, about proving that worth isn't written on uniforms or defined by status. That night, Samuel went back to his work. The mop, the bucket, the uniform, all the same. But he wasn't the same. He had reminded himself, and everyone else, of a truth too often forgotten. Genius, dignity, and greatness are not bound by race, status, or wealth. They live in those who refuse to let the world silence them. And as the echoes of his music lingered in that golden hall, one question remained. How many more hidden talents? How many more forgotten souls are waiting in the shadows, dismissed by a world too blind to see.